Today's webinar is titled Strengthening Business Intelligence with Generative AI and Knowledge Graphs. My name is Simone Abbiati, and I will be your host today. I work here at Squirro as the Head of Training and Education, and I'm thrilled to guide you through this exciting session that's gonna mention many things, plus the acquisition that Squirro has just done. We will diving into many different topics, and for sure, the most important one will be the synergy between knowledge graphs and retrieval augmented generation. So we will explore together why this combination could be a game changer in the field. And to unpack this topic, we have an incredible lineup of speakers. So I'd like to introduce you first Dr. Dorian Seltz, who is the CEO and co-founder of Squirro. David Clark, who's the founder of Synaptica. Hi, Dave. And Dr. Andreas Antoniades, who is the head of data science at Checkatrade. Together, we will discuss and we will share some insights and real-world examples of how this fusion can drive significant business value. To emphasize the importance of today's topics, I'd like to start from a quote, which is this one. A few months ago, as you see, the date is indicated in this slide, a very prominent paper has been published by Microsoft Research by a team led by Darren Edge, who's the senior director at Microsoft Research Special Project. And the only couple lines that I'd like to read with you today are these ones. Initial evaluations show substantial improvements over a naive RAG baseline for both the comprehensiveness and diversity of answers, as well as favorable comparison to a global graph-free approach. So what is Darren Edge mentioning? He's mentioning graph RAG, this new term which relates the integration of knowledge graph and RAG pipelines. This paper, probably many of the attendees have already saw it, generated quite a buzz in the AI field because the promise here is to minimize a lot hallucinations. And as many of us know, hallucination is one of the most relevant and challenging problems of the field. So this new strategy, this new technology is something that we need to be aware of. And this is why also a few newspapers have talked about this paper. First, Yahoo Finance, for example, that says, and here I am quoting, GraphRag solves a problem for enterprises struggling with complexity and hallucinations when building and deploying successful GenAI applications. So essentially, Yahoo Finance says that not only this strategy could minimize the impact of hallucinations, but that we could also have explainable pipelines, which is another very relevant point. Or again, the Journal of AI Business notes that with this framework, with GraphRag, companies can literally, I'm quoting again, supercharge RAG with knowledge graphs. So the topic is quite relevant. And my question is, first, why is this so important? And what is the business value here? And how does this topic relate with the integration and the combination of Synaptica and Squirro? Dorian, would you like to comment on this?
Simone, tante grazie. Thank you very much indeed. And also for me, a warm welcome to all the attendees here of today's webinar. We're grateful that you spent a short moment with us this morning, this afternoon, depending where you are, and listen to both Dave and me. We are both excited, like, is it fair to say, Dave, little boys, because we put together that we thought long about over the past years. And before going there, maybe also for you attendees, you probably all know a bit how Zoom works. there is a chat function. Should questions arise during the talk, please add them to the chat function. There will be a Q&A session like Simone outlined, where we're going to go through that at the very end.
So to
Simone,
summarize, yeah, exactly. Before delving into the topic of today, I'd like to remember that the agenda for the webinar is as following. First, as you saw, I introduced very shortly the topic from today. Then I leave the floor to both Dorian and David to present both the two companies and to present why this integration is so important. Then we will have Andreas from Checkatrade joining us virtually, unfortunately, but the discussion was very, very engaging, as you will see. Then we'll comment on that discussion, on that debate. And lastly, the last 10 minutes of this session, we will engage in a Q&A. So as Dorian said, in case you have any question during the presentation, please use the chat so that we do not interrupt the flow of the conversation. But then if you want to interact with our experts here present with us today in a direct form, then please feel free to question during the Q&A. Obviously, in case some of the questions won't be addressed today, we will get back to you by email and we will sort the questions out. So Dorian, back to you.
Thank you, Simone. The basic question: why do we put RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, and knowledge graphs together? We do that because they help to prevent hallucination. All of you here on the call, I assume you're deep into the subject yourself. This Retrieval Augmented Generation element that came up in the last 12, 18 months or so, there is nothing classic to it. It's new, it's brand new. Not all of it. In our case, we've been building search engines for the last 20 years. And Dave, you've been building knowledge graphs for the last 30 years. But now's the moment where those two things suddenly come together. And the reason that why they come together is indeed that that combination gives you the enterprise required level of precision to make these generative AI platforms finally truly usable in an enterprise format. And over the next couple of minutes, Dave and I want to go through that and lay out what that implies. The acquisition, yes, indeed, we chose after a longer process to put those two companies together, Synaptica and Squirro. Dave, you and I, we go a few years back, traveled the world a bit, and over the years, we got to know each other on a personal level, which is the most important, but also on a business level. And with all that happened in that RAG space, that combination, as we'll see on the next slide, makes the whole difference. To kind of like put that into context, why Squirro and Synaptica together make sense, I will first briefly, but only briefly, introduce the Squirro side, the insights engine side of the equation. And you, Dave, will then introduce the Synaptica, the knowledge graph side of the equation. More than 10 years ago, my two co-founders and myself set out with a simple quest. Enterprise search is to a large extent broken. Why? Search, at the end of the day, how it is understood in the past, is effectively kind of like a retrieval of a specific string of text, as an example, ABC. With no contextual know-how and comprehension of what that ABC means. Is that a TV station? Is that the alphabet? What is it? And more than 10 years ago, we started with Squirro to effectively ingest all types of machine learning mechanisms to give a computational understanding to the ingested data. Experimenting only 10 years ago with vectorization and all the rest of it. With that, we have built, Gartner calls it the most visionary insight engine platform, where today we dive into use case and talk a bit about that, what we now do together in across the enterprise, in sales, in service, in risk and knowledge management. And that takes you a long way, especially if you then, what happens over the past about 18 months, you add to this enterprise search engine a large language model and start to combine that. An enterprise search engine in itself is good. A large language model in itself is good. A large language model at the end of the day, though, is good. I simplify here a bit for the purpose of this webinar at exactly two things: text comprehension and text generation. A large language model, though, has limits in the moment it is about data ingestion at scale. Sounds a bit counterintuitive, but if you have a high velocity, high data lifecycle, high velocity data lifecycle, it's nearly impossible to ingest that into a large language model. And you also don't want necessarily to do that for security reasons. Which brings me to the second piece. The large language model per se is not good at role-based access, security. You can get access to the model, but not within the model to different components of the model. But that's an absolute requirement in any enterprise. And thirdly, a large language model in itself is actually not really good at search per se. So what we have done is we've simply combined that, because an enterprise search engine is good at ingestion at scale, is good at finding the relevant results, and is knowledgeable about who is allowed to see what. So what we've on our side done is this. We combine that, and today everybody calls that retrieval augmented generation. Initially, we called it retrieval augmented LLM, but I'm fine with the retrieval augmented generation play. Now, let's make one thing very clear. While this is extremely powerful, if you apply that in enterprise use cases, and the primary one that everybody sees today is I go and chat with documents, at the end of the day, the retrieval piece and the LLM piece are probabilistic compute. And as all of these you attendees know, 0.8 multiplied with 0.8 does not provide 1, but is 0.64. So while the RAG stack is infinitely better to be able to kind of like take out a lot of the hallucination elements, a lot of the elements where you're not sure are you allowed to see the data, it's not enough. It's not enough to get the level of precision that you require for enterprise use cases. That's the reason why we chose to go together with Synaptica. And the world of Synaptica, Dave, you maybe want to introduce us now in the next segment to then kind of like get to the combination of what those two technologies do. Dave.
Thanks, Dorian. So Synaptica, what we have always described to our clients and to prospective clients, what we're here to do is to help people organize, categorize, and discover their knowledge, their enterprise knowledge. And those three things are very specific ideas. So knowledge organization is about taxonomy, and we've had taxonomy software for over 25 years. It has evolved tremendously, and these days our software is called Graphite because it's all in the graph. It's basically knowledge graph-based taxonomy. But when companies do taxonomy, what they're trying to do is say, we need to control the use of language because we need precision in how language is used. We need to increase the recall. We need to provide ways of discovering knowledge. And all of that can go into a knowledge graph, into specifically a semantic knowledge graph. So what we produce is software to do semantic, ontology, taxonomy, and to do it in a graph and to create knowledge graphs. But this is kind of the evolution of lots of different industry standards and practices that have all basically ended up in our software in one form or another. The categorization piece is when companies create these taxonomies to provide ultimately a single source of truth across the enterprise, that when they say Mercury, they know what they mean. Is it the metal? Is it the planet, etc.? And so the standardizing language so that the classification process is going to provide consistent high quality metadata on content, and that obviously will improve search. Search is using that metadata in order to provide results. But it's a lot more than that, and this is why we're incredibly excited to join Squirro, because Synaptica's had tooling in the organization categorization piece, but we haven't actually had front-end tooling in discovery. And this is where Squirro is incredibly strong. They have wonderful user interface, wonderful search and discovery capabilities and tools, and really good classifiers. So by marrying the Synaptica toolset with the Squirro toolset, we actually complete our story, we complete our journey to be able to take people from organize, categorize, and all the way through to discover. I'd like to just cover the right-hand side of this slide, which is what's it all for? What's the business benefit? What are the risks if you don't do knowledge graphs and taxonomy and ontology? There are a few different benefits that come out of this. This is highly genericized, obviously, but I think they'll get the key ideas across. So total recall, it's not that I like Arnold Schwarzenegger films, it's the idea of there is risk when you get search results back, you think you've got the story, but you're missing things. And if you're in a mission critical business, those missing things can be the difference between a liability, a lawsuit, a product that fails because the right standards were not employed, the right engineering wasn't employed. Missing information costs businesses money. And getting to improve the recall, taxonomies help tremendously because they draw together the many different ways that things can be described, and that improves the recall. The flip side of that is precision. And in information science, precision and recall are the flip sides of a coin. And generally, what you do to improve one will deteriorate the other. In a taxonomy, you can get the best of both worlds. You can improve recall and you can improve precision. When you improve precision, business benefit is immediately you're reducing the time that's wasted on irrelevant results and information. The third bullet here is inferencing, and this particularly comes from being able to put things into a knowledge graph. In a knowledge graph, we are building a model of a business's world that is machine intelligible. And in that machine intelligence, you actually can generate new knowledge out of the graph by finding patterns, by finding connections, by basically traversing the graph from specific things to more general things and discovering new things. So inferencing is one of the key benefits. And just think of that as you can create new knowledge. You can discover things you didn't previously know. And the fourth bullet here in terms of benefits is process automation. And some of our clients are already doing this. They're not using taxonomies for search only or to retrieve documents and content. They're actually modeling in graphs and ontologies how their business does business, the process. And through that, they can improve the efficiency and the consistency of what they do. So these are some of the things that Synaptica has been in business to help people with, and really what we're about and how we fit with Squirro.
Which allows us effectively to do what we see on this slide. To build a reliable and accurate GenAI platform that people, your employees, can trust. You succinctly put it, Dave, right? The combination of a search engine with a knowledge graph allows you to push in that matrix with the precision recall, x-axis precision, y-axis recall, or vice versa, to push effectively that to the upper right corner. And that's where you want to be, that's where you need to be. So for employees, for people, for users, to trust such systems in the moment you start, as an example, to automate processes based on the information you have in such a graph. And to go beyond that, I think it's probably worthwhile for you, the audience, to deep dive with us a bit into how that works in detail. David.
Thanks, Dorian. So I'm going to speak to that in three stories or three slides. So basically, what is it that we provide to people? What is the software? So the software is called Graphite, and in it, businesses can create this model of their world. It is doing this in a way that makes it machine intelligible. And the key standards here are basically the World Wide Web, semantic web type standards. And the data is stored in a graph. It's stored particularly in an RDF graph, which is the W3C model for knowledge graphs that are ontological and semantic, and that support those business inferences. But what we aim to do with Graphite is to take all that kind of all that technical expertise in the back end and simplify it with an easy to use front end. So Graphite, I often describe Graphite as a simplification layer on top of formal semantics and ontology models. It's drag and drop. You can display graphical pictures of how knowledge is related to other knowledge, as illustrated in this particular image there. So it's a no-code solution that lets businesses build these machine intelligible models of their knowledge, and it works for any knowledge. Our client base is very diverse. I'll get to that in a minute. Thank you, Simone. So yeah, so our kind of user base is on the left side, some of the industry sectors that we work in. And the one thing to take away from that is diversity. We work with people doing food and social media. We work with people in defense and legal. It doesn't really matter what the industry vertical is. People are managing large amounts of knowledge. And with that knowledge, they are trying to improve the accuracy, the precision, the control. On the right side, we started really in the early days only working with taxonomists and ontologists, but our tooling is now adopted by a broader range of persona within the business. So it can be used by content managers, metadata managers who are not taxonomists or ontologists. The user interface is designed to be so easy to use that you don't need to have the ontology taxonomy training that you might have to use if you were using, a raw database tool, for instance, in RDF. You don't need that level of technical knowledge. We're providing more of a car than an engine to do this, and that car is designed for ease of use. Can we go back a second, Simone? So we've picked up these different personas, but the critical thing here is the middle bit. So what are our users using it for? Many cases where people are driving increased sales, online sales, through the improved ability to discover products and make recommendations, because the graph is making the recall and the precision better, and it's also surfacing associations which generate recommendations. We have people who are using software for business process automation in CRMs and in other applications, where you can automate, you can save money, you can save time, but above all, you can improve the consistency. We have a number of clients who are in a very risk-averse industry where mission-critical compliance is essential and quality of information retrieval is paramount. And in these situations, they are all doing taxonomy because they need a better method for accessing the information. Yeah, and there's some other applications there, but you can move me along now, Simone. Thank you. Okay, so putting the pieces together. We have started the build, and in fact been successful in early integration work with a model like this. So taxonomy and ontology, our Graphite software, is building the foundation of a knowledge graph. It's not the be-all and end-all of the knowledge graph, but the taxonomy ontology is the beginning of that knowledge graph. Then it leads into Squirro capabilities for classification, extraction, machine learning, etc. This is Squirro tooling looking at client content, but being informed by the taxonomy ontology knowledge graph. It then informs search, and on top of that, you can build the GenIA and RAG, graph RAG applications, which we've always started building for clients. It's incredibly exciting how fast this is moving. Think of this as also as a loop. So this is going to come back into the knowledge graph. We refer to content-aware knowledge graphs as being when the classification process is learning about the content. Ontology goes back into knowledge graph. The knowledge graph now knows more. It does classification better, and it then pulls back more knowledge into the knowledge graph. It can also enrich the taxonomy. So the ultimate benefit here is we've got a virtuous circle going between the formal definition of knowledge and the consumption of knowledge by search and classification. And ultimately, Dorian mentioned the probabilistic quality of LLMs and RAG. What Synaptica is bringing here is deterministic qualities that offset the probabilistic qualities, so that you can get the eloquence of RAG and chat, but with the deterministically defined model that a business wants to define, which it does in its taxonomies and ontologies. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Dave, for your perspective. So Dorian, we would like now to hear some actual use case of this technology. Can you tell us something more, something that Squirro has already addressed?
Mm-hmm. Sure. We have the privilege to work with some of the most exacting customers, central banks, an unbelievable amount of security for good reason. Absolutely tough selection processes, public procurement, all that. And we feel privileged to work with a few of them here in Europe, where we now start to deploy this kind of like combination to support supervisory processes, as in to be able to address, as an example, that exact element that you, Dave, mentioned, this precision element, where you take as an example a existing report that a commercial bank submitted and are able to link that automatically to the regulation in place. As an example, the credit rules directive, because at the end, that's what the supervisor is paid for. She is paid for making an assessment about the financial standing, about the quality of that bank's reporting, while she is not paid for going through tens of thousands of pages and figure out where exactly that type of information sits, and then correlate and compare that, as an example, to the rule book in place. Case one. We have done that across other industries as well, and start to expand that. And what is phenomenal to me is, in the moment you start doing this at scale, for me, it really reminds me of what I often say 25 years ago, when, quote, quote, the internet came about. Some of you here on the call maybe remember that Newsweek, I believe it was, or was it Time? Instead of a person of the year, they had the internet as sort of the thing of the year. Back in, what was it, 98, 99? Would need to go and search. And everything changed. I had an earlier conversation with someone in a large financial institution. Both of us are early 50s, and we both reminisced about back in the days you bought the computer, you bought a compact disc to listen to music. Today we stream music. What happened? Everything changed. The internet liquefied music to some extent, disintermediated, reintermediated again, and today you have an entirely different industry set up in the music industry. And what we start to see is that the exact same thinking can be applied to a number of use cases today within each of these enterprises that we have here. So just in very brief, service automation, the ability to have natural flowing conversations whereby you take as an example an inbound customer request that in many, many cases is not precise enough to be answered directly. What you now can do with that combination of a RAG stack like ours and a graph stack like Synaptica's is you can make that a natural conversation where the system automatically goes back to the user and asks, should you provide more information of this type or that type, until you have the ticket qualified to an extent that you need it to be able to reply to it. Once you've done that, you're able then to automatically generate an answer. LLMs then come to the rescue. And third, what you then do is you start to automate by going to the process section of that graph and initiate the next best action elements. We have seen phenomenal success with this type of interaction patterns where you automate away large chunks of relatively repetitive tasks. And here's the important point about that. Obviously, this is a cost savings case. You save cost, you take cost out of the equation. But what you also see is that some of our customers start to understand what this really is. This is an efficiency and a quality game that they can change. Because what they can do is they can higher up the quality of their service. They can, as an example, better guarantee SLAs in their service area. And with that, they ultimately have a better competitive position, which translates into higher revenues. So what looks at the outside, maybe just as a simple cost cut case, is not. And in the process, you can also reshape the type of work that the folks in such customer support cases do. Quite often you have high churn. We have seen churn reduction. Why? Because people can now focus on the more interesting piece, and the digital coworker does the more mundane piece. In the same way, we see that in knowledge management, where you create in that combination of a RAG stack and a knowledge graph, a single knowledge fabric. We do that for some of these companies here, where we, as an example, have a deal qualification. Deal comes in, we are automatically be able to say, that's the type of deal. Have we, as a private equity company, done that? Who is the expert for it? What is our initial assessment of it? Immediately improves the quality of the whole process and allows, as an example, the analysts to, again, focus what they're really paid for. Namely, to make a call, is that worth the firm's time to invest time into the assessment of such a deal? Instead of going through 300 pages of documentation, try to figure out, is that even a deal they shall invest in? And the last piece is what you see here in sales, right? A lot of us here, us by the way included, are subject to a lot of inbound RFIs or RFPs, RFQs, whatever they're called. They're always kind of like repetitive, because whether you're company A, B, C, D, the type of question you ask in the moment you want to procure, as an example, a solution like ours, are similar. You want to know about the functionality, you want to know about the deployment options, you want to know about security, you want to know about integration endpoints, etc. But obviously all of these RFIs, RFPs are subtly differently written. Now you can literally automate that away. Saya, as an example, uses that to answer to 500-600 page RFIs in the aviation space, and they do that at scale. And with that, they effectively drive sales volume. So it's this combination and these type of early stage use cases that are here today. The bigger picture, though, I think we're going to hear now, right?
Yeah.
Simone. Let's bring in our friend and colleague from Checkatrade. I give it over to you and Andreas.
So now, as I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, we would like to invite Dr. Andreas Antoniades into the conversation, who can be with us virtually. So we had a debate around graph RAG and about the implementation of knowledge graph and RAG pipelines within the context of Checkatrade, which is a UK-based company that connects homeowners with local tradespeople. So they have to deal with a lot of different industry, which is specifically why the power of knowledge graph could be really a relevant point here. So we're gonna listen to Andreas and me debating these things, and then we're gonna get back to Dave and Dorian to comment on what we have just heard. Hello, Andreas, and thank you for accepting our invitation. And the first question that I have for you is basically to introduce yourself, to share with us your passions, your background. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation, and it's a great pleasure being here with you today. First of all, hello, my name is Andreas. I am the head of data science for Generative. My background and experience is quite varied. So I started off as a computer scientist. I moved into neuroscience for my PhD, where I studied the epileptic brain and how we can model it with deep learning architectures. And then I moved on to industry, where I worked in a number of domains, including high frequency trading on global indices, natural language processing, as well as code and app automation tools. And I've joined Generative just over 10 months ago to lead the data science function.
Okay, cool. Quite a diverse background. Context of this webinar, I'd like to ask you, how are you planning to utilize knowledge graphs in enterprise environments, and what benefits could this integration bring?
Certainly. We know that knowledge graphs serve as a comprehensive and interconnected representation of both structured and unstructured data. And they help capture the intricate relationships between and semantic connections between entities involved. Through the strategic utilization of these knowledge graphs, generative AI systems are able to gain access to a vast repository of contextual as well as structural information, thereby enabling them to produce outputs that are more applicable and relevant in real-world applications.
Yeah, sure. So relating the last thing you said, accuracy, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about this. So any thoughts, any ideas in how to enhance the accuracy of information retrieval? Because as you said, knowledge graph could contextualize the information we could extract from the database, which means that we can minimize hallucinations. So what's your take on that?
That's actually a great question, and something that the AI community has been trying to solve since the advent of large language models. By assimilating data from diverse sources and encoding this information into entity attributes or metadata, if you may, as well as into the actual structure of the knowledge graph, the resulting system acquires a profound comprehension of the domain it operates within. This heightened understanding empowers the generative AI to generate outputs that are more contextually relevant and precise. As to how do we avoid hallucinations? Well, the way to circumvent them is to limit the information scope of the LLM to the structure of the graph, and then filter its output to allow for only attribute information that are contained within the relevant entities of the graph.
Okay, sure. So different entities. So I've been reviewing the activities that Checkatrade is doing, and I saw that the company encompasses a wide range of trade person category verticals. So I was wondering, what type of taxonomies are you planning to use when implementing knowledge graphs? What kind of categories, what kind of structures?
Well, very well done on the research. This is actually something we're really passionate about. The interconnected nature of the graph permits the system to traverse and explore the intricate relationships between those entities and unveil the hidden patterns and insight within. This enhanced reasoning capability augments the generative AI system's capacity to produce outputs that better align with the objectives and fulfill the specific enterprise requirements, if you may. As such, we will be leaning on the entirety of the trade data we have amassed over the last few decades to unlock further value for both our consumers as well as our customers.
Okay. So as you mentioned, again, diverse requirements, specific needs of different industries. So can you also discuss a little bit more the integration of domain-specific knowledge into generative AI systems via knowledge graph for sure, because that's the topic of today.
Certainly. So by incorporating domain-specific ontologies and taxonomies into a single graph, the AI system can harness the expertise of both subject matter experts as well as domain specialists. This integration of specialized knowledge further enhances the generative AI's aptitude to generate outputs that are more accurate, more relevant, and better aligned with the enterprise's domain-specific requisites.
Exactly.
In our case, trade lingo. Such integration almost creates a translation layer that acts as a mediator, allowing domain experts and consumers to interact using the languages they are most comfortable with.
This last thing that you mentioned is also quite relevant because it enhances accessibility, language diversity. It's always important to interact with these systems in our native language, so it's a very relevant point. So last question for this talk together. In summary, how do knowledge graphs empower generative AI system, and what their overall impact on enterprise environments?
I believe that all in all, knowledge graphs empower generative AI systems in enterprise environments by providing comprehensive structural, contextual, as well as semantic understanding of the domain. This enables advanced reasoning, inference, and it facilitates the integration of foundation large language models, which are generic by nature, with domain-specific industry applications. This unlocks the potential of generative AI to generate outputs that are more accurate, contextually relevant, tailored, and limited to the specific requirements of the enterprise. Consequently, the application and value of generative AI are significantly amplified in graph-enabled enterprise settings.
I love this conclusion. It's similar to a circle composition, if you may, because we got back to the problem of accuracy of hallucinations, which, as you mentioned yourself, it's one of the most relevant and challenging problems in the field. So the fact that knowledge graphs could minimize hallucinations and therefore provide us with improved and enhanced outputs, it's certainly a relevant point.
Absolutely.
So, thank you again for having accepted this invitation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you as well.
So, quite an interesting conversation, high-level conversation, but Andreas certainly is a fun guy. And as you saw, he touched upon many different topics. I don't know if you have any, we spoke about domain-specific knowledge, we spoke about contextualizing information so that we can be able to minimize hallucinations. He mentioned different category verticals, different industry, different needs, many different topics. Do you have any comments on that, Dave, Dorian?
Dave.
Sure. A lot of comments. There was just a lot of cogency in Andreas's thoughts there, but there was one particular thing that resonated with me. He said something along the lines of when you incorporate taxonomies into the graph, that the AI can capture or harness the expertise of the subject matter expert in the business. And that then drives how Gen AI is working. It's got a guide, if you like. What really struck me about that is Synaptica has been working, for over 25 years with businesses who've built models of their world as taxonomies. They didn't build them for Gen AI. They built them for search and retrieval generally. But those models, those taxonomies, are actually a goldmine of structured knowledge that when you connect it to Gen AI is going to be capable of doing things that those taxonomies were never even conceived could be capable of doing. And so, and Andreas is really sort of was talking about what they are specifically planning to do. But what it really makes me think of is all the businesses out there, all the enterprises out there who've got taxonomies. If you have any interest whatsoever in Gen AI, then start to think about what you've already invested in is capable of being connected to Gen AI and doing new things. And this is, I mean, we're working with a number of clients together with Squirro now to do just that. But I kind of like to make anyone who's got taxonomies out there think about the power of that information, because it is extremely reusable, not for its original purpose, but reusable in new applications. And I think that's very exciting.
Okay, now we don't have that much time left. So I'd like to start with the Q&A session. So let's see, oops, from the chat.
You read them out, or how do we go?
Let me see.
There's one I'll speak to while you're scanning through those, Simone, if I may. So one of the audience said, where does this journey start? Does it start with taxonomy and ontology before even thinking about LLMs and knowledge graphs? I don't think there's one linear pathway here. You could start from LLMs and do work and then end up realizing you want a more deterministic control over the process, or you could start with the taxonomies. Obviously, from my world, we work with people who've done taxonomies, so the most natural thing to me is to start with the taxonomy, which is kind of the knowledge model of a business, and then lead into the other things. But I think, you know, you could come at this from either direction is the answer. The most important thing, I think, though, with the LLM is not to confuse an LLM with a database. An LLM doesn't know anything about your content. It doesn't know anything about your business. It is a probabilistic language model, and that's all it is. As Dorian said earlier on, when you connect that with enterprise content in a secure way, which is the RAG model, you then are bringing in data about the business, which is the content, the databases, etc. But if you really want to control that conversation, that's when you need to bring in the ontology. So whether you start at the left or you start at the right, they've got to meet in the middle to really get the value out of it. That's, I think, my comment on that question.
Okay, there's another question, a very fascinating one, at least from my side. The question from Arslan is the following. Should we use LLMs to create knowledge graphs? Many orchestration packages have given pipelines to do so. So what is the best strategy to build a knowledge graph using LLMs? So what's your take on that? Dave, I think you are the most competent here to answer this question, to address this question. It's certainly a challenging path, because then using foundational models to devise something that is so domain specific could be hard. So, but that's what innovation and researchers have been experimenting quite in the few months. So any comments?
Yeah, I'll make my comment brief because I just answered another question. Make sure there's room for other contributions here. But so it depends what kind of knowledge graph you're creating. I mentioned earlier on that we're in the business of creating semantic graphs, semantic knowledge graphs. In a semantic knowledge graph, strings become things. There's a human curation in the process. And the businesses that typically care about the precision of their knowledge models are quite engaged in subject matter expert input and review on what that knowledge model is. So if you're using LLMs to create the knowledge graph, you're back to probabilistic graphs that you will create, as opposed to deterministic ones. Let me give you a concrete example. Supposing in your world, you're dealing with food, and the question comes in, can I eat this chocolate cake? I've got a severe nut allergy. You don't want a probabilistic answer to that question. You need a deterministic answer to that question. And that's where the knowledge graphs need to be curated in a form that gives complete confidence and control. And so those are not going to be generated primarily from LLMs up. They're going to be created from the expertise of the business down, and then they connect to the LLM, and there can be enrichment and everything else, but it really depends on how precise you need to be.
Okay, another question, a very pragmatic question. If we can show the report from Microsoft and the name of the guy who we quoted, sorry, and the name of the paper is From Local to Global, a GraphRag approach to query-focused summarization, and the main author is Darren Edge. He's been working on that with a few other colleagues from Microsoft, and in case anyone wants that paper, we can get back to them. As you see, we will get back to you, attendees, with the webinar recording, with the knowledge graph white paper we created and we curated, and also we can indicate the sources and the paper for sure. Another question I see here in the Q&A, can we already extract knowledge from images and videos with the technology we have at our disposal? I think, Dorian, that could be a question that you could answer best.
Well, technically, that's not a knowledge graph question, right? Technically, that's an extraction question. So you simply need certain types of techniques to extract whatever you want, as an example, out of an image. That can be a scan, or that can also be a video. And then you can put that into a knowledge graph. So yes, sure, you can. It's part of our pipeline we offer. We don't do that all ourselves. We have tools for that, but sure, you can.
Okay. I think for today we have...
No, we have more questions. There are plenty more questions. No, plenty. Let's go.
Okay. One question more from Emad Nabi. Do you have any plans to partner with leading cloud marketplaces such as Microsoft Azure and Google, which extend Squirro insights for enterprises on cloud? Dorian, again, this is yours. I think it's quite easy question to answer.
Yes. Work in progress. Stay tuned. Get in touch with us, Emad, and we're happy to explain that in more detail and the roadmap to that.
Okay. Another question, since we have a few minutes left. A KG built with a mature tool is itself far better than a KG that comes out of an open source library like Microsoft GraphRag or gliner, no debate. But do you have performance measure on how much query response using LLM plus GraphRag needs a perfect KG, or how much other factors, for example, domain-specific fine-tuned models, define the ultimate performance? So this question, since relates KGs, I think it's for you, Dave.
Yeah, so so the question really about open source library or generic KGs versus more
tailored,
enterprise specific. There is I think it depends in which industry sector you work in. So for instance, where we work with clients who are in science, medicine, and engineering spaces, there are knowledge graphs out there that are open source, and they're extremely useful, they're extremely reliable. And anything in the scientific community is it's curated with a really good degree of respect for common language and speaking and terminology. But there are other areas and other business sectors where there really isn't anything out there that is generically reusable in terms of describing what goes on inside a business. So that's one factor. In terms of metrics, I think it's too early to have LLM versus LLM GraphRag statistics. There are some papers that I saw, and I can post one afterwards, but there was some research paper that was done recently, which did do some comparisons. So that's one data point. But I think this is still such an extremely emerging field that it will take a while before you've got like a body of hard metrical data for that.
Sure. We are just at the start, given also that that paper that we mentioned, it was just published a few months ago. So another great question about security issues and compliance from John Tulinski. I'm interested to hear a bit more about the security issues of LLMs that Dr. Sells mentioned during the introduction. I'm not an expert, but I haven't heard much about this particular problem. So Dorian, that's for you, since the guest is mentioning you explicitly.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I hope you're still here, and more than happy, obviously, also to connect a post-webinar to go into more detail. Your question is a multi-layered one, right? I can walk you through some of our largest installations, as I said, for central banks, with a number of hoops of security. Obviously, there is first the way you set this whole thing up. Is it on-prem? Is it the cloud deployment? Is it the virtual private cloud deployment? That is sort of the perimeter of where you operate in. The second piece then is how you get access, and as just a glance at another question, to different data sets. All these different data sets quite often also have different role-based access models that you need sort of to now layer on top. So there is a whole big array of security elements that you need to take care of at the moment of ingestion to be able to say this data set, this vectorized data set, you, John, are allowed to see it or you're not allowed to see it, right? Then comes obviously the next piece. How do you handle that whole thing in terms of to make sure that there is no data leakage, as an example, in terms of in the moment you expose something to an LLM. Obviously, there's much advanced. The big commercial ones do offer this now, as an example, OpenAI through Azure from Microsoft. But then you also have open source ones that you can deploy locally, or at least in a kind of like virtual private cloud GPU type container setup. But the real core, the real big thing, I think for the whole audience to note is how to do role-based access control in a fast-turning index environment, fast-turning as in data lifecycle. That's the crux to make it enterprise viable, because I have not seen enterprises of any shape, size, and form that have not stringent security requirements in that respect. And an LLM in itself cannot do that. You need to have a stack like ours. And then obviously, yes, there is a lot of elements in and around, and more than happy, John, to expand on that but beyond the talk we have here.
We have time for one last question from Tamas Kaliuste. I really hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. What did you mean by creating the graph with no code? How does this work in practice? That's a question for Dave, I think, relating the extraction and the shaping of the knowledge graphs.
Yeah. So what I meant by that, the context in which I said we have no-code solutions to the knowledge graph management is not about extracting data where you may use ML and code processors. It's about managing the human curated graph. So in the tooling that we provide, we focus on a no-code solution where you can design and build ontologies, design and build taxonomies, populate them, pull in data. It all gets converted into machine intelligible data structures or knowledge graph structures, but you don't have to know how that is happening because there is a very friendly front end for doing that. So that was the context in which I was referring to no code in terms of KG curation.
Maybe
Okay.
to add to that, I see here in the question and answer section, and I believe you're going to go through that, not all today, but you're going to follow up post-webinar, right, Simon?
Yeah.
But Tamas, you also asked about a use case where you say you want to, as an example, take such a combination to do a use case sort of in the wider healthcare space. We should talk about that. We actually are working on such cases. And to a point, I think that we made throughout this webinar, in the moment you go to healthcare, you want precision. A RAG approach in itself will not do it. You can maybe Tamas, and maybe as a follow-up, you, Simona, we can also share that with the audience. You did the other day and beyond fantastic speech about healthcare and knowledge graphs and how that's changing the game. Yes, indeed. That's one of the core use cases that you indeed now can do with reliability numbers that you have not seen before. Back to you, Simone.
Yeah, surely today we just have 1 hour. The topics are really fascinating. We should have like a couple hours more just to describe data governance, data compliance, accuracy, domain-specific knowledge, knowledge graph completion as well, which would be a fantastic topic, but obviously we cannot touch all these different topics today. So the next step after this webinar, for all the attendees and for those who couldn't attend the webinar, we will get back to you with a webinar recording so that you can see and rewatch and reflect, hopefully, on what we discussed today. We will receive also the knowledge graphs white paper that we did at Squirro with the help of Synaptica for sure. And in case you wanted to know more about the acquisition, you have the link here. You can look at our webpage that has just been renovated, quite a cool style, I'd say. So stay tuned, and thank you for having attended this discussion, this conversation, and don't hesitate to get back to us. We are passionate, we are driven, and this is just the start of this synergy. So really, thank you again, and hope to hear from you soon.